Hey guys, Zen here. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the top 10 decks in the current meta for Secluded Springs. Now, I know you might be wondering to yourself, what are you talking about top 10? It's only Suicun Greninja, and Suicun Greninja. Well, it's actually not. There are about 10 very meta relevant decks that are doing fairly well in this current meta, with a few outliers like Xatumi EX and Skarmory, which I'm sure you guys have been seeing in the ranked ladder. With that being said, we're going to go over each of these decks with a deck list showcase of them, and I'll also talk about how to counter them, if you can even counter them, and what kind of player play style these decks best fit. With that being said, don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe, and let's hop into the first deck that everyone is thinking about, and that is Suicun Greninja. But before we talk about this deck, I just want to let you guys know, if you're struggling in ranked, you're not alone. Ultra 3 and Ultra 4 is possibly the worst experience I've ever had in ranked. And then the second I hit Masters, it's actually a breath of fresh air. Yes, there are some people still playing very meta-dominant decks, but if you're looking for spicy decks, play them probably in casuals or wait until you get to Masters to play those spicy decks. Otherwise, you're probably going to want to play one of these 10 decks in today's video. So now let's talk about this Suicun Greninja deck list. Well, it revolves around Suicun, the legendary doggo cat, you know, the one with the ability Legendary Pulse, which lets you draw at the end of your turn. This is really good because if you guys remember the set before this, Giratina, Greninja, Sylveon was very strong, but now you get rid of the Eevees and you replace Sylveon with Suicun, and you have your spot in your deck for 2 more cards. You can put things like double Irida, which helps you sustain. So that's what this deck does. It draws your cards. You can snipe from your bench, you can Cyrus them onto the active spot, and while you're doing all of that, you have the option to also heal your Pokemon that have water energy with Irida right here. And on top of all that, if we go back to Suicun, the added pressure of your opponents not being able to play benched Pokemon. Now, you're probably looking at this deck and you're like, how the heck do you counter it? Obviously, things like Oricorio do fairly well in this, but this deck, once it gets going, is rather difficult to go up against. So the things that best counter it are Pokemon that can just handle their own without needing supporters on the bench. Things like Skarmory or these solo Decadui decks, or even Guzlord EX, have been doing exceptionally well into this type of deck. You just run those Pokemon, you focus on those Pokemon, and you heal those Pokemon over time to then overcome Suicun, Giratina, and Greninja. Speaking of Giratina, Giratina can just ramp itself from the bench, which seems pretty broken, but that's why this deck is doing so well. So hopefully, now that you understand how to combat it, if you're seeing a lot of your matches end up being Suicun, Greninja, Giratina, you might want to combat them with a deck that doesn't require you to fill up your bench. Speaking of which, let's move on to our second deck, and that's Dark Tina, a deck that I've actually started playing a lot more of. In fact, when this deck first came out, this idea, this core strategy, I never played it. I hated it almost as much as I hate Suicun Greninja. However, I started playing it recently to really understand it. And this is for the players that want to just have options at the start, at the mid game, and even at the late game, if you will. And what I mean by that is this deck only revolves around 2 Pokemon, Giratina, which can ramp itself from the bench or even the active spot, but also Darkrai, that you can ping damage onto your opponent's active Pokemon, which is very, very strong. Ever since Darkrai EX even showed its face in the meta, it's been relevant every single set. There's not a single set, mini set, where Darkrai didn't feel as strong. Maybe, I'll give you, when Extra Dimensional Crisis came out and Buzzwool was a thing, maybe Darkrai wasn't as strong then. But just being able to ping damage from the bench by just attaching energy is pretty strong. And now the cast of supporter cards and even just the regular item cards are very helpful. You have Red card to cycle out their hand, as well as Mars, so you have 2 options to disrupt their hand. You have healing options being Nurse Joy, aka Pokemon Center Lady, and a potion. You have Guzma to further disrupt their Tool synergy, Silver for more disruption, Leaf for utility, and Cyrus to close out games, because again, you're pinging damage. And we also have 2 Rocky helmets, because if they hit you while you're charging up, because this deck needs to charge up, they're going to take damage. So if they end up retreating, you could always bring them back in and smack them with Giratina. Now, the best way for this deck to work is to charge up your Giratina to the point where they are able to attack. The following turn, they'll have their energy, all 4, and you can still ping with Darkrai, meaning you're doing 150 on the board. Now, what does this look like? If you're going second, you give Giratina the darkness energy because this deck only runs darkness energy. So that way, by turn 2, you already have 2 energy, and then you could ramp, and by turn 3, you'll have all your energy, so that way you can start hitting by turn 4. You can hit for 150 by turn 4. And with all the disruption we already talked about, that's often all you need to win games. And let's say they do end up getting your Giratina and knocking it out, well, you have Darkrai in the back that can also hit for 100 with its ping damage. So across the board, these Pokemon are exceptionally strong. Another new card, a new addition to this deck is Repel because of that Suicun Greninja meta that we're seeing. So when they have their Giratina or Suicun in the active, you can just use Repel and still have access to a supporter card, which is fantastic. All right, let's move on to Guzlord EX, which is another really cool deck that I've been playing a lot of, and this feels pretty strong. Now, a lot of people say this is Guzlord EX solo, but it's not. You do run a Celesteela to help you pivot out your Pokemon when you need to. And the idea is simple here. Again, you're not filling up your bench. You only have 1 or 2 Pokemon at most. And Guzlord has this side effect, the bonus of their move Grindcore, being able to remove all the energy from your opponent's active Pokemon, as long as you're hitting heads. If you hit tails, then it's nothing, right? So however many heads you hit, you're removing that energy. So if they're building up their Suicune, you hit them with 2 heads, they can't hit you again with Suicune. All the while, you have access to things like Potion, double Pokemon Center Lady, a Will for either your Guzlord or even your Celesteela, disruption cards being Red Card, and Mars. This is very Darktina adjacent, if you will, and the 2 Rocky Helmets. Again, a fantastic deck that can deal up to 140 damage in a single turn if you Tyrannical Hole with a red. And again, we don't see Sabrina here because the Repel has been exceptional in this current meta. Because again, the first 3 decks that we're talking about, because people are playing these decks, are mostly basics. You have 2 basics here, you have 2 basics here, and you also have 2 basics here. So Repel again is just going to be really good. Next up is Flareon EX Eevee box, which runs 4 Eevees and does everything you need it to do in order to win games. Flareon EX is exceptional because it can charge itself up by adding those energies that you discarded previously by either retreating or even using the Flareon non-EX here with its ability Combust. Now, the cool thing about this is Fire Spin is 130, and a lot of the Pokemon you're going to go into are going to be around 140 outside of having capes. So if you use at least 1 Eevee bag, a single Flareon can counter Suicuns, can counter Darkrai's, which is really strong. We're also running nothing other than Repel here in order to Gust, because that's been the most successful with this type of deck, as well as 2 reds. So not only can you do extra damage with Eevee bag, but now you have a maximum damage output of potentially dealing 170 damage. So like Guzlord EX, knocked out with Flareon and 2 Eevee bags and a red, which you're probably thinking like there's no shot you can draw all that. Well, the single Sylveon EX definitely helps you draw your cards, that's for sure. And again, the non-EX Flareon is here to counter things like Oricorio. Magby's also here to help you ramp early on, and also just put energy on the board that you can later use. This type of deck are for players that really enjoy the overall synergy a deck provides to be strong mid-game and even late game. Speaking of which, another deck that runs Eevee box is Espeon Eevee box, which complements with the deck we just talked about. However, instead of ramping energy, it's all about healing and drawing cards. You have your Espeon EX that can heal, but on top of that, you're running capes, you're running your Eevee bag, only a single Eevee bag. And ironically, the 2 sleepers in the back have to be Espeon and Sylveon, the non-EX variants, because with Sylveon non-EX, you can deal up to 130 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon if all of your Pokemon on the bench are evolved. So if you have double Espeon EXs, a Sylveon EX that helps you draw, your non-EX can hit for 130, you guys. 140 with a single Eevee bag, often knocking out that Pesky, Suicun EX, and Darkrai EX. For disruption, we have Sabrina Mars here and Guzma to get rid of their tools. And if they're a deck that actually wants to face you off in the late game and your Espeon EX's own recovery isn't enough and they're packing on energy on the board back to back to back, well, we have Espeon here that can have no limit to the amount of damage they can do dependent on how much energy your opponent has on the board. This deck are for players that are looking for a more flexible approach while playing rank. Next up is a Buzzwool EX deck, and it's similar to the other decks we were talking about earlier, more specifically Guzlord. Even though it does run 6 basic Pokemon, the idea is you're not filling up your bench, you're getting your Buzzwool online, and once it can get online, you have red here to do 120 to a potential Suicun EX, knock him out, or even just without red, knock out a Darkrai EX, or just do a lot of damage. Now, if you're not going into those two matchups, well, you have Pheromosa that can ping damage to their benched Pokemon, which then you can use your double Cyrus to pull in. We also have some incredible sustain with Erica here, 2 Ericas, and Ramp to help your Buzzwool get online with the Lusamine if you lose something like Pheromosa early. Pretty standard Buzzwool EX deck list, and this is for the players that want a very specific game plan that you don't want to deviate from. Get your Buzzwool online, hit them where it hurts, back to back to back. Next up is Raichu EX with the Magneton Magnezone build, and this one is honestly so cool when you actually can get it working. Now, the ideal game plan here is to have your Oricorio to counter EXs, but let's just say you lead Raichu, their Legendary Pulse activates, you draw a card right at the end of your turn, all while having a Magnemite on your bench. This is just your first turn. Now, second turn, even though you couldn't attach an energy, you evolve into Magneton, which generates its own energy. You elemental switch onto your Raikou and then attach the energy from your energy zone to your Raikou. And now Raichu EX can attack for 60 and ping one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for 10, which your double Cyrus can definitely take advantage of the following turn, all while Magneton ramping itself, so you don't even have to give it more energy, and having a late game finisher like Magnezone come in and hit for 110. Also, a newer addition to this deck has been that PCL, the Pokemon Center lady, that adds sustain and a little bit of healing, and then the X speed for when you actually just need to just retreat into an Oricorio or maybe even your Magnezone to finish out the game. Now, ironically, I'm going to say this is for those players that feel pretty lucky. They feel like they are going to consistently be able to play their Raikou turn 1 and get that elemental switch on the Magneton to just attack and start swinging for heavy damage. Otherwise, if you're okay with not having perfect openers, this is still a really good deck to try out in ranked and see how you like it. Next up is a big boy D-Knight EX, which is very interesting. We're running 3 baby Pokemon here. Cleffa to help you draw your Pokemon cards, Pichu to help you ramp lightning energy, and Mantike to help you ramp water energy, all while still running both elemental types of energy in your energy zone. This deck typically doesn't just pick one like we used to do in older D-Knight deck lists. Now, on top of that, your D-Knight, once you get it online, you just win. There's nothing surviving your 180 unless it's like a Decadewey with a Leaf Cape. And the fantastic part about this is if you have a baby Pokemon on the bench and you Lyra your D-Knight, well, you can get out of the Giga Impact's effect of not being able to attack the following turn because you just go right into your baby Pokemon, retreat for free because Lyra does not count as a retreat, and then you can go back to back Giga Impacts, which is honestly absurd. This type of deck list are for those patient players. Again, you're not going to have amazing openers. You're not going to have amazing games all the time. I mean, I don't think there's a single deck here that will give you amazing games all the time. However, this also has extra layers like potentially bricking your energy zone. So if you don't have the patience for that, then maybe this isn't your deck list. However, if you do have the patience and want to play a deck that once you get online feels almost impossible to stop, well, then this is your deck. Also, the non-EX Dragonite, for those of you wondering, is honestly there to counter Oricorio. Next up, let's talk about Arceus EX. This deck has been fairly strong. I actually uploaded a video on a deck list similar to this a while ago, and I showcased how you can get Arceus online by turn 2, you guys, it is crazy. And it all revolves around your Zeraoras being able to ramp themselves if you draw them turn 1. Again, there's a lot of things that need to go perfect for this amazing strategy to work. And your Pichu can also ramp your Arceus. So that way, by turn 2, you can just rotate in an elemental switch if you need to, and you have 2 of them. All you would need at that point is 1, but if you had 2, that's just pretty much good game. And you're swinging for 130 with a full bench, 140, which counters those Pokemon we've been talking about with our double Giovannis. And to add just a little bit of extra measure, we have Cyrus to close out games and Mars to disrupt, as well as a PCL to heal and sustain ourselves. A very strong deck that also includes Oricorio to lock out and wall EXs. Which brings us to our final deck list that I really want to talk about, and that is the Rampardo Sil Valley. Now, you don't see this too often. In fact, you started seeing a different variant of Sil Valley being Sil Valley Giratina. However, personally, I think this one is still very strong, and the type of players that would want to play this are those that are trying to close out games fairly quickly. High rollers, right? High risk, high reward type decks. You're either going to high roll or you're going to low roll and get everything you need or get nothing that you need. But the thing about this deck is it makes matches go by fairly quickly. So if you're just trying to grind out those games, then this might be the deck list for you. Because once you can get Sil Valley going, especially if you go second, you have that energy. All you have to do is use a supporter card from your hand, and you're hitting for 100, potentially 110 if you're using that Giovanni. All while still finding your cards like your Skull Fossil and your Rare Candies or Cranidos to evolve into your Rampardos and come in swinging with 130. Now, I say this is aggro and fast, but it could go the distance because, again, none of your Pokemon are EXs. So your opponent has to knock out all your Pokemon on the board, or at least 3 of your Pokemon. So again, I still think this is a top 10 meta deck. But there you guys have it. Those are what I think are the top 10 meta decks, also using Limitless's own database and their analytics. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Did I miss something? Maybe Decidueye EX, maybe Skarmory is coming up there. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. And again, if you're struggling with Ultra 3, Ultra 4, you're not alone. Take a breather, take time. Remember, this is just a game, and have fun if it's possible. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, hype, and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one. Later.